The room erupted in laughter when Tunde Adebayo leaned back in his leather chair and pointed at the quiet maid. "Translate this," he said coldly, sliding a document across the table. "And my salary is yours." Phones lifted. Executives smirked. Sana Bello stood frozen, her worn uniform trembling slightly under their gaze. Then she spoke. Fluent, precise, effortless. French turned into English, English into Yoruba. Every word carried confidence no one expected. The laughter died. One by one, heads turned. Even Tunde stopped breathing. Who was this girl they had been mocking? "Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there?" Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Long before anyone in that polished glass building knew her name, Sana Bello was just another invisible figure moving quietly through the corridors of Lagos's busiest corporate district. Every morning before sunrise, while the city still yawned under a blanket of humid darkness, Sana would wake up in a cramped one-room shack in Ajagunle. The rusted zinc roof above her rattled with every gust of wind, and when it rained, she would place old plastic bowls around the room to catch the dripping water. On a thin mattress beside her lay her younger brother, Yusuf Bello. He was only 12, but illness had stolen the strength from his body. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and some nights Sana stayed awake just to listen, counting each breath, afraid one might be his last. "Sana," Yusuf's weak voice called that morning, barely louder than a whisper. She turned immediately, her tired eyes softening. "I'm here. Are you going to work again today?" She smiled, though her heart ached at the question. "Of course. I have to bring you medicine, don't I?" He nodded slowly, clutching the edge of his blanket. "You always come back late." "I'll try to come earlier," she said gently, though she knew it wasn't a promise she could keep. There was never enough time, never enough money. Sana reached for the small metal box hidden beneath her mattress. Inside were neatly folded papers, old certificates, faded transcripts, and a student ID from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Once, not long ago, she had been one of the brightest students at the University of Lagos, studying languages: French, English, Yoruba. Even a bit of Swahili she had picked up out of curiosity. Her professors used to say she had a gift, but gifts didn't pay hospital bills. Everything changed the day their mother collapsed in the market. By the time Sana rushed her to the hospital, it was too late. The cost of treatment, the funeral, the debts, it swallowed everything. Her education, her dreams, her future. She never returned to school. Instead, she took the first job she could find, cleaning floors, carrying trash, becoming invisible. By the time Sana arrived at Adebayo Global Holdings, the sun had fully risen, casting golden light across the towering glass building that seemed to belong to a different world. Men in tailored suits walked past her without a glance. Women in expensive heels spoke into phones, their voices sharp and confident. The air smelled of perfume and ambition. Sana adjusted her worn-out uniform and slipped quietly through the staff entrance. To them, she wasn't Sana. She was just the maid. "Hey, you're late again." The voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Sana stopped immediately. Standing near the reception desk was Ifeoma Okafor, her supervisor, tall, perfectly dressed, with eyes that never seemed to soften. "I'm sorry," Masana said quickly, lowering her gaze. "I don't care," Ifeoma snapped. "Do you think this is your village? This is a company, not a charity." "I understand." "Then move faster," Ifeoma added, handing her a stack of cleaning supplies. "The executive floor needs to shine before the meeting starts. Important guests are coming." Sana nodded. "Yes, ma." As she walked away, she heard the quiet laughter of two receptionists behind her. "She looks like she hasn't eaten in days. People like that should be grateful they even have jobs." Sana kept walking. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than dignity. The executive floor was a different world entirely. The carpets were softer. The walls gleamed and even the air felt cooler. Large glass windows overlooked the city, stretching all the way to the distant ocean. Sana moved quickly, wiping surfaces, adjusting chairs, polishing the long conference table that would soon host powerful men and women. But as she worked, something caught her attention. A document left open on the table. It was filled with paragraphs in French. Sana paused. Her fingers tightened slightly around the cloth in her hand. She read a line, then another. Without realizing it, her lips moved softly as she translated the words into English. Proposal for strategic expansion, cross-border partnership, financial restructuring. Her heart beat a little faster. She understood everything, every word. A sudden voice behind her made her freeze. "What are you doing?" Sana turned sharply. One of the junior executives stood there watching her with narrowed eyes. I was just cleaning, sir," she said quickly, stepping back. "Then clean," he replied coldly. "Don't touch things you don't understand." "I'm sorry." He shook his head and walked away, muttering under his breath. Unbelievable. Sana lowered her gaze again, but something inside her stirred. A quiet, aching reminder of who she used to be. Later that afternoon, as the building buzzed with unusual energy, whispers spread through the staff. "Big international deal today. Partners from Ghana and France. CEO himself is leading the meeting." Sana listened as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. She had never seen Tunde Adebayo up close before. Only from a distance, stepping out of black cars surrounded by security, his presence commanding silence. People said he built his empire from nothing. Others said he trusted no one. But everyone agreed on one thing. He had no patience for weakness. The meeting room filled quickly. Executives took their seats. Foreign guests exchanged firm handshakes. Assistants moved in and out carrying documents and tablets. Sana stood quietly near the back, pretending to adjust a curtain while finishing her work. Then the door opened, and Tunde Adebayo walked in. Tall, impeccably dressed, his expression calm but his eyes sharp, observing everything, missing nothing. The room, instantly, fell silent. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin." The meeting started smoothly at first. Introductions, formalities, polite smiles. But then a problem. The French delegate began speaking rapidly, his tone urgent. Confusion spread across the table. One executive tried to respond but stumbled. Another whispered, "Where's the translator? No one told me we needed French at this level." Tunde's expression darkened. "This is unacceptable," he said coldly. No one spoke. The deal worth millions hung in the balance. From the back of the room, Sana felt her heart pounding. She understood every word the delegate was saying, every concern, every demand. She hesitated. This wasn't her place. People like her didn't speak in rooms like this. But Yusuf's face flashed in her mind. The hospital bills, the nights of fear, slowly, almost unconsciously. Sana took a step forward. Her voice when it came was soft. "Sir, I can help." The room turned. Every eye locked onto her. Ifeoma's face twisted instantly. "What are you doing here? Get out, I just thought Ifeoma snapped. Since when do maids think? Laughter rippled faintly across the room. Tunde leaned back in his chair, studying her. For a moment, there was silence. Then a slow, cold smile appeared on his face. "All right," he said. The room grew still. He picked up the document, the same one Sana had seen earlier, and slid it across the table toward her. "Translate this," he said, his voice low but cutting. A pause. Then he added loud enough for everyone to hear. "And my salary is yours." The room exploded with laughter. Phones came out. Whispers turned into open mockery. Sana stood there, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. But this time, she didn't lower her eyes. Not completely, because something inside her had already begun to rise, something that refused to stay invisible any longer. In the silent seconds that followed his challenge, Tunde Adebayo did not look away from Sana Abelo. He watched her the way a man studies something he has already decided the value of: cold, measured, dismissive. To him, she was not a person stepping forward with courage. She was an interruption, a mistake that needed to be corrected, or better yet, exposed. And yet, there was something in her eyes. Not defiance, not arrogance, something quieter, something steadier. It unsettled him, more than he cared to admit. "Go on." Tunde set his tone almost casual, though the entire room leaned in as if waiting for a performance. "Show us." Sana swallowed her fingers, tightening around the document. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if anyone else could hear it. The words on the page blurred for a moment, not because she didn't understand them, but because of the weight of every eye fixed on her. Across the room, Ifeoma Okafor folded her arms, lips curved into a thin smile of anticipation. This would be quick, she thought. Embarrassing. Final. Sana took a slow breath, and then she began. At first her voice was barely above a whisper, but the words were clear, accurate, controlled. The proposal outlines a strategic partnership aimed at expanding cross-border trade between West African markets. The room shifted. A few heads tilted. Someone lowered their phone slightly. Sanaya continued, her voice gaining strength with each sentence. The financial structure suggests a phased investment approach, beginning with logistics infrastructure and followed by distribution channels. A murmur spread among the executives. One of the French delegates leaned forward, eyes narrowing, not in doubt, but in recognition. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't struggling. She understood, fully. Tunde's fingers, which had been tapping lightly against the armrest of his chair, slowly stilled. This was unexpected. He said nothing, but his gaze sharpened. Sana reached the end of the paragraph, then paused just for a second before looking up. "Would you like me to continue, sir?" she asked quietly. The room held its breath. Tunde did not answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto hers. "Continue," he said. This time his voice had changed. Only slightly, but enough. As Sana moved through the document, something extraordinary began to happen. The laughter that had once filled the room was gone, completely erased, as if it had never existed. In its place was silence, not the careless silence of boredom, but the heavy, focused silence of attention. Every sentence she translated was precise. Every technical term was correct. Every nuance carried across languages without hesitation. French to English, English to Yoruba when clarification was needed. Even brief phrases of formal business tone were delivered with a natural rhythm that no amateur could fake. Across the table, Mr. Kofi Mensah, one of the Ghanaian partners, exchanged a glance with the French delegate. "This is impressive," he whispered under his breath. The French delegate nodded slowly. "Very." Ifeoma's smile had disappeared. Her arms dropped to her sides, her posture stiffening. This was not how this was supposed to go. Tunde watched everything. Not just Sana, but the room, the shift in energy. The way seasoned executives, people who had dismissed her minutes ago, were now leaning forward, listening closely, respectfully, and that irritated him, because it meant something he had always believed might not be entirely true. That talent could hide anywhere, even where he refused to look. "Stop." The word came suddenly. Sana froze mid-sentence. Her eyes flickered toward Tunde. For a brief moment, fear returned. Had she made a mistake? But Tunde wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the document, thinking, calculating. Then, without warning, he switched languages. He spoke directly in French, fast, complex, layered with subtle phrasing designed to confuse even intermediate speakers. Several executives glanced at one another, unsure. This was no longer a simple test. This was a trap. Tunde turned his gaze back to Sana. Translate. One word. Sharp. Deliberate. The room tightened again. Sana's pulse quickened. She understood every word he had just said. But this was different. This wasn't written text. This was live, unpredictable. She hesitated for half a second. Then she spoke. He is questioning the long-term sustainability of the partnership and suggesting that without stronger regulatory assurances, the investment could face significant risk. Her voice did not shake. Her tone did not break. And when she finished, the French delegate nodded immediately. That is correct. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, but undeniable. Tunde's jaw tightened slightly. Still, he wasn't done. He leaned back, folding his arms. Yoruba, he said suddenly. Another shift. Now he spoke again. This time in Yoruba, but using proverbs and layered expressions that carried cultural depth. Not something easily translated into formal English. It was another test. Harder, more subtle. Sanae listened carefully. Every word, every tone. And then she translated, not word for word, but meaning for meaning, emotion for emotion. He is saying that trust is like a bridge once broken, even if repaired it never feels the same. And he is asking whether both sides are truly ready to commit, without hidden intentions. This time, even the Yoruba-speaking staff in the room exchanged surprised looks. She hadn't just translated. She had understood. Deeply. Silence. Thick. Heavy. Unavoidable. No laughter, no whispers, no movement. Just the sound of quiet breathing in a room that had completely changed. Tunde stared at her. For the first time since she entered the room. He had no immediate response. No sarcasm, no dismissal, only a slow, unsettling realization. He had underestimated her. Completely. And in front of everyone. Ifeoma stepped forward suddenly, her voice sharp, almost desperate. This must be rehearsed, she said. She probably memorized something. It's not real enough. Tunde didn't raise his voice, but the single word cut through the room like a blade. Ifeoma fell silent instantly. Tunde stood up, slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Sana. What is your name? He asked. The question felt different this time. Not mocking, not dismissive. Sana hesitated, then answered softly. Sana Bello, sir. He nodded once, as if committing it to memory. Then he turned slightly, addressing the room. Continue the meeting. Simple, direct, but everything had changed. Because now when people looked at Sana, they didn't see a maid. Not anymore. They saw something they hadn't expected. Something they hadn't believed possible. And perhaps for the first time in that building, they saw her. The meeting resumed, but nothing felt the same. Words were still exchanged, numbers, still discussed contracts, still negotiated. But beneath it all there was a quiet shift no one could ignore. The invisible line that had once separated Sana Bello from everyone else in that room had been disturbed, not erased, but shaken. Sana stepped back slowly, retreating to the far corner of the conference room, where she had stood before. Her hands were still trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it by folding them neatly in front of her. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken, and now she needed to disappear again. That was how survival worked in her world. But the world around her had other plans. From across the table, Mr. Kofi Mensah kept glancing in her direction, his curiosity no longer hidden. Finally, during a pause in the discussion, he leaned slightly toward Tunde and spoke in a low voice. That young woman, she is not just trained, she is gifted. Tunde did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the documents before him, though his mind was elsewhere. I can see that, he said quietly. Kofi nodded. People like her are rare. You should not waste that. Tunde's jaw tightened just slightly. Waste. The word lingered. Because if there was one thing Tunde Adebayo prided himself on, it was efficiency, precision, the ability to recognize value and capitalize on it. And yet, he had almost turned her into a joke, in front of everyone. He didn't like that feeling. Not at all. Across the room, Ifeoma Okafor stood stiffly near the wall, her eyes locked onto Sana. The humiliation burned in her chest. Not because Sana had succeeded, but because she had done it publicly, in front of the CEO, in front of international partners, in front of everyone who mattered. That kind of attention, that kind of recognition, was dangerous, especially for someone like Sana. Ifeoma had spent years building her position, earning respect, controlling her team, maintaining order. She knew exactly where everyone belonged. And Sana had just stepped out of her place. That could not be allowed to continue. When the meeting finally ended, the room slowly emptied. Executives gathered their documents. Assistants rushed to follow up on instructions. The foreign delegates exchanged polite handshakes, though many of them cast one last curious glance toward the quiet girl in the corner. Sana waited. She always waited, until the room was almost empty. Only then did she step forward, reaching for her cleaning cloth, ready to return to the role everyone expected of her. But before she could begin, Sana, her name, stopped her. She turned slowly. Tunde Adebayo was still there, standing near the head of the table, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, panic flickered across her face. Had she done something wrong? Was she in trouble? "Yes, sir," she said softly. He walked toward her, not rushed, not hesitant, measured, controlled, stopping just a few steps away. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 2 years, sir. And before that, she hesitated. No one had ever asked her that. I was in school, sir. What did you study languages?" A pause. "Why did you stop?" The question landed heavier than the others. Sana lowered her eyes. "My mother passed away," she said quietly. "There were responsibilities." Tunde studied her for a moment. He didn't offer sympathy. He wasn't that kind of man. But something in his expression shifted just slightly. "And no one in this company knew about your abilities?" he asked. Sana shook her head. "No, sir." "Why not?" Another pause. Longer this time, because the answer was not simple, because the truth was complicated. "I didn't think it mattered," she said finally. The honesty of it caught him off guard. Not arrogance, not self-pity, just truth. To her, it really hadn't mattered, because no one was looking. Before Tunde could respond, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Sir, I need a moment." Ifeoma stepped forward, her posture firm, her tone respectful. But beneath it, there was tension. Tunde turned his head slightly. "What is it?" Ifeoma glanced briefly at Sana before speaking. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," she said. "What happened in the meeting, while impressive, may not reflect her actual capabilities in a consistent setting." Sana felt her chest tighten. "Here it comes." Ifeoma continued. "She has never demonstrated these skills before. It is possible she prepared in advance, or that's enough." Tunde's voice was calm, but final. Ifeoma stopped. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Tunde spoke again, his gaze still on Sana. "Prepare another test." Ifeoma blinked. "Sir, a real one," he said. "No preparation, no notice." His eyes shifted slightly toward Ifeoma now. "If she fails, we forget this ever happened. A beat, and if she doesn't..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. Everything would change. Later that evening, long after the office lights had begun to dim, Sana walked home under the fading glow of the Lagos skyline. Her feet ached, her body was exhausted. But her mind refused to rest. The words echoed again and again. Prepare another test, a second chance, or a second humiliation. She wasn't sure which one it would be. When she finally reached home, Yusuf was awake. "Sana," he called weakly as she entered. She rushed to his side immediately. "I'm here," she said, sitting beside him. "You're late again," he whispered, though there was no accusation in his voice. "I'm sorry. Did something happen?" Sana hesitated. Then for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself a small smile. "Maybe," she said. Yusuf looked at her curiously. "Good or bad?" She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't know yet." And that was the truth, because somewhere between the laughter of that room and the silence that followed, something had shifted, not just in the eyes of others, but inside her. For the first time in years, Sana Bello had stepped out of invisibility, and now, there was no going back. The next morning arrived too quickly. For Sana, Bello's sleep had come in fragments, thin, restless, filled with echoes of voices and memories she could not quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the conference room again, the faces, the silence, the moment her voice had broken through years of invisibility. And then, the words that followed. "Prepare another test." It lingered like a storm, waiting to break. She rose before dawn, careful not to wake Yusuf Bello. The small room felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were listening. Sana moved quietly, folding her worn uniform, smoothing it with her hands, as if it could somehow carry dignity if she treated it gently enough. Before leaving, she paused beside Yusuf. He was asleep, his breathing shallow but steady. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I'll come back," she whispered softly, more to herself than to him. Because now more than ever, she had to. By the time she reached Adebayo Global Holdings, the atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically, not openly, but subtly, undeniably. People looked at her, not all of them, but enough. Some with curiosity, some with disbelief, some with quiet discomfort, as if they were unsure how to behave around someone who had suddenly broken an invisible rule. Sana kept her eyes lowered as she entered through the staff door. She did not belong to their world. Not yet. "Sana!" The voice stopped her mid-step. She turned slowly. It was Ifeoma Okafor, standing near the hallway entrance, her posture straight, her expression composed. But her eyes carried something sharper now. Controlled. Calculated. "You're early," Ifeoma said. "Yes, ma." "Good," she replied. "You'll need the extra time." Sana felt a slight tension rise in her chest. "Ma." Ifeoma stepped closer, lowering her voice, just enough to keep the conversation between them. "The CEO has arranged another evaluation," she said. "Today. So soon." Sana's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. "I understand." Ifeoma watched her carefully. "You should be nervous," she added. "Yesterday was unexpected, but don't confuse a moment of luck with ability." Sana said nothing, because there was nothing to say, but inside her something resisted the word. Luck. It hadn't been luck. It had been years. Years of silence. Years of learning in the dark. Years of surviving. "The test will be in the main conference room," Ifeoma continued. 10 o'clock. Don't be late." "Yes, ma." Ifeoma gave a small nod, then turned away. But as she walked, her lips pressed into a thin line. Because she wasn't leaving this to chance. Not again. By mid-morning, the building buzzed with quiet anticipation. Whispers moved from desk to desk. "She's being tested again. The maid." "Yes." In front of the CEO, I heard external partners will be there too. Some laughed, some doubted, some waited, because whether they admitted it or not, they wanted to see. Inside the conference room, preparations were already underway. Documents were arranged neatly, screens were set, chairs aligned perfectly. This time there would be no accident and no surprise. Everything had been carefully planned. At exactly 10 o'clock, the room began to fill. Executives took their seats. Assistants stood along the walls. Even a few employees who had no business being there found excuses to linger nearby. And at the head of the table, Tunde Adebayo, calm, composed, but more alert than usual. He had not forgotten the previous day. Not for a second. At 10 minutes past, the door opened. Sana stepped in. The room fell quiet again. Not as loud as before, not as mocking, but quieter in a different way. Expectant, she walked slowly to the center of the room, her posture straight despite the weight pressing down on her chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. But she did not stop. On time, Tunde said. His tone gave nothing away. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward the table. "Sit." Sana hesitated. She had never sat at that table before, not once in 2 years, but she obeyed, lowering herself carefully into the chair, aware of every eye watching her. Tunde leaned forward slightly. "This will not be like yesterday," he said. "I understand, sir." No written documents, he continued. No preparation. A pause. Only interpretation. Sana nodded. Her heart beat faster. This was harder. Much harder. Tunde turned slightly toward the large screen behind him. "Bring them in." The door opened again. 3 individuals entered. A French businessman, a Ghanaian investor, and a Kenyan consultant. They took their seats without unnecessary conversation. Professionals, serious, unforgiving. This was not a test designed to be passed easily. This was a test designed to break. "You will interpret in real time," Tunde said, his gaze fixed on Sana. "Multiple speakers, different accents, no repetition, a beat. Do you accept?" Sana swallowed. Every instinct inside her whispered the same thing. This is dangerous. This is too much. But then she thought of Yusuf, the hospital bills, the nights she stayed awake listening to his breathing, and she nodded. "Yes, sir." The test began. The French businessman spoke first, fast, technical. His words flowed without pause, filled with industry jargon and complex phrasing. Sana listened. Every word, every tone. Then she spoke, clear, precise, effortless. Next, the Ghanaian investor. His accent shifted the rhythm of the conversation. His sentences carried local expressions, layered meaning beneath simple words. Sana adapted. Instantly, her translation flowed smoothly, bridging the gap without hesitation. Then the Kenyan consultant. Different pace, different structure, more analytical, more demanding. Sana adjusted again, her voice steady, her mind sharp. Minutes passed, then more. The room grew still, not tense, not mocking, but focused, completely absorbed. Because what they were witnessing could not be dismissed. Tunde watched her closely, not as a skeptic now, but as a man confronting something he could no longer deny. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was skill, real, rare, undeniable. Across the room, Ifeoma stood frozen. Her plan had failed. Not just failed, collapsed. Because this time, there was no excuse left. No explanation that could erase what everyone was seeing. The final speaker finished. Silence followed. Heavy, complete. Sana took a slow breath. Her hands rested still on the table. No trembling, no fear, just quiet strength. Tunde stood, slowly, deliberately. The entire room seemed to rise with the movement. He looked at Sana. Really looked at her. For the first time. Without judgment, without dismissal. Only recognition, but recognition alone was not enough, because now he had to decide what to do with it. The silence after the final interpretation did not break immediately. It lingered, thick, undeniable, pressing against every person in the room. Not a single voice rushed to fill it. Not a single chair scraped. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed distant, as if the building itself was holding its breath. At the center of it all sat Sana Bello. Calm, still, no longer shrinking into herself. Across from her, Tunde Adebayo remained standing, his gaze fixed on her with a level of intensity that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with realization. He had tested her twice, and twice she had answered without hesitation. There were no more excuses left, no more doubt to hide behind, only truth. And truth, Tunde knew, demanded action. Again. The word came unexpectedly, soft, controlled, but it sliced through the silence. Several executives shifted in their seats. A few exchanged quick glances. Another test. Sana blinked once, her heart giving a sudden sharp beat. "Yes, sir," she asked quietly. Tunde stepped forward, resting his hands lightly on the edge of the table. This time he said, "You won't interpret." A pause. "You will lead." The room reacted instantly, though no one spoke aloud. "Let a maid." Even Sana felt the weight of the word press against her chest. "I don't understand, sir," she said honestly. Tunde's eyes did not leave hers. "You understood every concern raised in this room," he said. "Every hesitation, every risk." He gestured slightly toward the international partners. "So now, you will respond." The air shifted again, because this was no longer about language. This was about authority, about voice, about stepping into a space she had never been allowed to occupy. Sana's throat tightened. This was different, dangerous in a way the previous tests had not been. Because translating was safe, it was invisible, but speaking for the company that meant being seen, judged, measured, and possibly rejected. "I am just," she began softly. "A maid," Tunde finished. The word hung between them. Not mocking, not kind, just real. Sana lowered her eyes slightly. "Yes, sir." Tunde straightened. "No," he said. The single word carried quiet force. "You are what you have just proven." A pause, "And I want to hear it." Across the table, Mr. Kofi Mensah leaned back slightly, studying the exchange with interest. This was no longer a test. This was something else, something deeper. The kind of moment that revealed more than skill. It revealed character. Sana's hands rested in her lap, her fingers pressing lightly against each other as she tried to steady the storm rising inside her. She had spent years learning to stay quiet, years training herself not to speak unless spoken to, years shrinking her voice until it barely existed, and now she was being asked to use it in the most dangerous place possible. Her mind raced. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she embarrassed herself? What if she proved them all right? But then, a memory surfaced. Her mother's voice, gentle, firm. "You don't need permission to be who you are, Sana." The words echoed through her chest. Slowly, she lifted her head. "I will try, sir," she said. Tunde nodded once. "Begin." Sana turned slightly toward the international partners. Her posture straightened. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "I understand your concerns," she began. The French businessman leaned forward slightly. She continued. "The issue is not just financial risk," she said. "It is trust." A small shift moved through the room, because she had gone straight to the heart of it. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just clarity. She turned toward the Ghanaian investor. "You are worried about long-term stability," she said. "Not just profit." He nodded slowly. "Yes." Sana continued, her confidence growing with each word. "Then the solution is not faster expansion," she said. "It is stronger structure." She gestured lightly toward the documents. A phased approach with transparent reporting at each stage, independent oversight, shared accountability. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to, because every word carried weight. Tunde watched her carefully, not interrupting, not guiding, just observing, because now he needed to see how far she could go. Sana turned to the Kenyan consultant. You spoke about regulatory uncertainty, she said. He nodded. Yes, that is correct. Then we address it directly, Sana replied. Local partnerships, legal alignment before expansion. She paused briefly, then added, not after. The consultant's expression shifted. That was exactly what he had been pushing for. The room was no longer watching out of curiosity. Now they were listening, fully, because this was no longer a test. This was a solution. Sana took a breath. Then carefully she spoke again. If trust is a bridge, she said softly, echoing the earlier proverb, then we do not just repair it. A pause. We rebuild it stronger. Silence followed, not empty, but full, because in that moment, she had done something none of them expected. She had not just translated ideas, she had shaped them. Tunde's expression remained still, but inside, something shifted. This was not talent alone. This was insight, understanding, leadership, and it had been hidden behind a uniform. Finally, he spoke. That will be all. The words were simple, but they carried finality. The test was over. Sana exhaled slowly her body, only now realizing the weight it had been holding. Her hands trembled slightly again, but this time she did not hide it. Because she had done what she was asked. She had spoken. The international partners exchanged glances. Then one by one they nodded. Approval, not loud, not exaggerated, but real. Tunde turned toward them. Well, he asked. Mr. Kofi Mensah smiled slightly. If this is the direction he said, then we are ready to proceed. The French businessman nodded. Agreed, the Kenyan consultant added. With these adjustments, the risks are manageable. Just like that, the deal was back. Not because of strategy, not because of power, but because of a voice no one had been willing to hear. Across the room, Ifeoma felt something collapse inside her. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to deny, because the truth had already spoken. Tunde turned back to Sana. For a moment he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and in that silence, there was no arrogance, no superiority, only a quiet acknowledgement of something he could no longer ignore. You may go, he said finally. Sana nodded. Yes, sir. She stood slowly, her legs slightly unsteady, and walked toward the door. But this time, no one looked past her. No one laughed. No one dismissed her. Because as she stepped out of that room, she was no longer invisible. And inside, Tunde Adebayo stood still for a moment longer. Because for the first time in years, he had been forced to confront a simple truth. He had built an empire by recognizing value. But somehow he had almost overlooked the most valuable thing right in front of him. By the time Sana Abello stepped out of the conference room, the hallway felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just aware. People who had once walked past her without a second glance now paused their conversations, lowering into whispers as she passed. Some tried to pretend nothing had changed, quickly looking away. Others stared openly, their curiosity no longer hidden. Sana kept walking. Her steps were steady, but inside her thoughts were anything but. Everything had happened too fast. The test, the voices, the way the room had listened to her. And then, the silence that followed. She didn't know what came next. She only knew that something had shifted, and she could not return to who she had been before. Sana. The voice came from behind her. She turned. A young assistant, Zainab Musa, hurried toward her, slightly out of breath. I just wanted to say. Zainab paused, searching for the right words. That was incredible. Sana blinked, surprised. Thank you, she said softly. Zainab smiled nervously. I didn't even know you could do all that. Sana gave a small, almost apologetic smile. Most people didn't. Zainab hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "You should be careful," she whispered. Sanaa's brows knit together. "Careful." Zainab glanced around before lowering her voice even more. "Not everyone is happy about what happened," she said. "Especially her." She didn't need to say the name. Sanaa already knew. At the far end of the corridor, Ifeoma Okafor stood watching. Her posture was composed, her face calm, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She had spent the last hour replaying everything, every word, every reaction, every shift in the room. And one truth stood above all the others: Sana was no longer harmless. She had crossed a line, and people like Ifeoma did not survive by ignoring threats. They eliminated them, quietly, efficiently, completely. "Sana." The voice came again, but this time it was different, deeper, controlled. Sana turned. Tunde Adebayo stood a few steps behind her. The hallway fell silent almost instantly. Even those who pretended not to notice slowed their movements, because when the CEO spoke, people listened. "Yes, Sir Sana," said her voice, respectful but steady. Tunde studied her for a moment. Up close, she looked smaller than he remembered. Thinner, her uniform worn at the edges, and yet, none of that matched the presence she had carried in that room. "Walk with me," he said. A simple instruction, but one that sent a ripple through the hallway. Sana hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Yes, sir." They walked in silence, past glass offices, past employees who quickly looked down at their desks as the CEO passed, past the world Sana had only ever observed from the edges, until they reached his office. Tunde's office was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, stretching all the way to the distant coastline. The furniture was minimal but expensive, every detail precise. Sana stepped inside, carefully, unsure where to stand. "Sit," Tunde said, gesturing toward a chair. She hesitated again. Not because she didn't understand the instruction, but because it felt unfamiliar. She had never been invited to sit in a place like this. Still, she obeyed. Tunde remained standing for a moment, his back to her as he looked out over the city. "You handled yourself well," he said finally. Sana lowered her gaze slightly. "Thank you, sir." "That was not luck," he continued. "No, sir." A pause. "Then why are you cleaning floors?" The question was direct, sharp, but not unkind. Sana took a slow breath. "Because I needed to survive," she said. Tunde turned slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment but in thought. "Many people need to survive," he said. "They don't all have your abilities." Sana did not respond immediately, because she had asked herself that same question many times. Why her? Why had she been given something she could not use? Sometimes she said quietly, "Ability is not enough." The words settled in the room. Tunde studied her again. There was no bitterness in her tone, no anger, just truth, and that made it harder to ignore. He walked slowly toward his desk, resting his hands against the surface. "I made you a promise yesterday," he said. Sana's heart tightened slightly. "Translate this, and my salary is yours." The words echoed in her mind. At the time they had been a joke, a humiliation, but now they carried weight. "I didn't expect you to succeed," Tunde admitted. His honesty was unexpected. "I know, sir, and yet you did." A pause. "So now I have a decision to make." Sana's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Tunde leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "I could ignore what happened," he said. "Return you to your position. Pretend none of this matters." He watched her carefully. She said nothing, because she had already prepared herself for that possibility. Her life had taught her to expect disappointment. Or he continued, "I could acknowledge it." Another pause, and change things. Sana's breath caught slightly. Hope, dangerous, unpredictable, but impossible to ignore. Tunde's gaze sharpened. If I give you an opportunity, he said, it will not be easy. I understand, sir. You will be tested, he continued, challenged, questioned. Yes, sir, and if you fail. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because failure in a place like this did not come quietly. It came with consequences. Sana lifted her head slightly. For my brother, she said softly, almost to herself. Tunde frowned slightly. What she met his eyes. For my brother, she repeated stronger this time. I will not fail. The certainty in her voice was different. Not hopeful, not desperate. Certain, and that caught his attention. For a moment, Tunde said nothing. He simply looked at her. Then slowly, he nodded. Good. He reached for a file on his desk, opening it briefly, before closing it again. Starting tomorrow, he said, you will not report to the cleaning staff. Sana's heart skipped. You will report directly to me. The words felt unreal, heavy, transformative. You will assist in translation negotiation and communication with international partners. A pause. And we will see how far your abilities truly go. Sana sat still, unable to speak for a moment, because everything she had known was shifting. Not gradually, but all at once. Thank you, sir. She said finally, her voice quiet but filled with something deeper than gratitude. Determination. Tunde nodded once. You're dismissed. Sana stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady again, but not from fear this time. From change. As she reached the door, she paused briefly. Not turning, just standing there. Because part of her still couldn't believe it. Then she stepped out. Outside, the hallway seemed even more different than before, because now, the change was no longer invisible, and across the building, whispers began to spread. The maid was no longer just a maid. But far down the corridor, Ifeoma Okafor stood still, her expression unreadable. She had seen Sana enter that office. She had seen her leave, and she understood exactly what it meant. This wasn't over, not even close, because power, once threatened, does not retreat quietly. When Sana Bello stepped out of Tunde Adebayo's office, the world outside no longer felt like the same place she had walked through just hours earlier. The polished floors, the glass walls, the distant hum of conversations, all of it remained unchanged. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. It was not just the way others looked at her now, though. That alone would have been enough to unsettle anyone. It was the awareness within her, quiet but undeniable, that she had crossed a boundary she had once believed was impossible to cross. She walked slowly down the corridor. Her posture composed, her hands held together in front of her, as she had always done. But today, there was a subtle difference. Her steps were no longer those of someone trying to disappear. They were measured, deliberate, as though she were learning one moment at a time how to exist in a space that had never been designed for her. People noticed. A group of junior staff members fell silent as she passed, their earlier laughter replaced with cautious glances. One of them, who had once openly mocked her worn shoes, now lowered his eyes, pretending to scroll through his phone. Another gave a small nod, uncertain whether respect or curiosity was the more appropriate response. Sana did not react. She had learned long ago that attention, whether kind or cruel, could be dangerous if she allowed it to shape her too quickly. For now she held on to stillness, letting everything settle before deciding who she would become in this new reality. As she reached the staff corridor that led to the maintenance area, she slowed. For 2 years, this had been her world, the place where voices were louder, where hierarchy was clear, where she knew exactly where she stood. It was where she had survived, where she had hidden, and now she was being asked to leave it behind. Inside, the cleaning staff gathered around their usual table, preparing for the afternoon shift. Conversations were casual, familiar, filled with the rhythm of shared routine. But as soon as Sana stepped in, the room fell quiet. They had heard. Of course they had. News traveled faster in places like this than in any executive office. One of the older women, Mama Bisi, who had always shown her small acts of kindness, looked at her with wide eyes. "Sana, is it true?" she asked softly. Sana hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth felt too large, too uncertain to put into simple words. I don't know yet," she said finally. Mama Bisi studied her face, then nodded slowly. But something has changed." Sana gave a faint smile. "Maybe." From the corner of the room, a younger worker, Kunle, let out a quiet laugh. "So now you will leave us and go sit with the big people, eh?" His tone was not entirely unkind, but there was something else beneath it, something edged with discomfort. "I am not leaving anyone," Sana replied gently. Kunle shrugged. "That's what they all say." The words lingered in the air, because in a place where opportunity was rare, change was often seen as betrayal. Sana did not argue. She simply nodded once and moved toward her locker, taking out her cloth and supplies for what might be one of the last times. She did not yet know how to explain that she was not trying to rise above anyone. She was just trying to survive, and perhaps for the first time to live. As she turned to leave, Mama Bisi reached out and touched her arm. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "do not forget who you are." Sana met her eyes. "I won't." But even as she said it, she wondered if that would be harder than she expected, because who she was already changing. Back on the executive floor, the atmosphere had grown heavier. Inside a glass office overlooking the city, Ifeoma Okafor stood alone, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The reflection of her own image stared back at her from the window, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the morning again and again. She had seen the way Tunde looked at Sana, not with pity, not with amusement, but with recognition. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Recognition meant value, and value meant power. Ifeoma had spent years earning her position, navigating a system that did not easily reward women, let alone those who came from nothing. She had built herself carefully, step by step, ensuring that she was indispensable, that she controlled what needed to be controlled. And now a girl in a worn uniform had walked into that space and disrupted everything. It was unacceptable. She turned away from the window and picked up her phone, dialing a number without hesitation. "Good afternoon," she said once the line connected, her tone, smooth and professional. "Yes, I need to make an adjustment to the documentation for the international contract." "No, it's nothing major, just a procedural detail." She paused, listening. "Yes," she continued. "I'll send the revised version shortly." As she ended the call, a faint smile appeared on her lips. If Sana wanted to step into a new world, then she would have to survive it. And Ifeoma would make sure it was not easy. Meanwhile, in his office, Tunde Adebayo sat behind his desk, the city stretching endlessly before him. The documents from the meeting lay open, but his attention was elsewhere. On Sana. He replayed her words, her tone, the clarity with which she had spoken. Not just translating language, but understanding meaning. It was rare, not just skill, but instinct. And instinct could not be taught. He had built his empire by recognizing such things. Yet somehow he had missed it. Or perhaps he corrected himself, he had chosen not to see it. Because it had come from a place he did not expect. A place he did not respect. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. There was a lesson in that. One he did not particularly enjoy, but one he could not ignore. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." The door opened and Ifeoma stepped inside. "Sir," she said, her expression composed. "I've begun preparing the necessary documents for the new arrangement." Tunde nodded. "Good." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "About Sana." His eyes lifted. "Yes, I believe it would be wise to proceed cautiously," she said carefully. "Promoting someone so quickly without a full evaluation could create complications." Tunde studied her, not her words, but her tone, her timing, her intent. "Are you concerned about the company?" he asked, "or about her?" Ifeoma held his gaze. "Both." A pause. Tund leaned forward slightly. "Then we will evaluate her," he said. "Properly." Ifeoma nodded. "Of course, sir." But as she turned to leave, there was something unreadable in her eyes, because evaluation in her hands would not be neutral, and she intended to make sure of that. Elsewhere in the building, Sana stood alone near a window, looking out at the vast city below. The noise of Lagos carried faintly through the glass cars' voices, life moving forward without pause. She placed her hand lightly against the cool surface, her reflection staring back at her. For years, she had lived one life, invisible, quiet, surviving. Now another life was opening before her, uncertain, dangerous, but full of possibility. She thought of Yusuf, of the hospital bills, of the nights she had spent studying by dim light, refusing to let her mind fade, even when her body was exhausted. All of it had led here, to this moment, to this chance. And as fear and hope twisted together inside her, one truth became clear. She could not go back. No matter how difficult the path ahead would be, she would walk it. Because for the first time in a long time, the future was no longer something she feared. It was something she might finally be able to change. That night, the city of Lagos pulsed with its usual restless energy. But inside the small, dimly lit room, Sana called home. Everything felt still. The sounds of distant traffic and late-night vendors drifted faintly through the cracked window, blending into a quiet rhythm she had grown used to. Yet tonight, that rhythm felt different, almost distant, as if her mind could no longer fully settle into the life she had always known. Sana sat beside Yusuf Bello, watching him sleep. His breathing was uneven, each rise and fall of his chest carrying a weight that pressed deeply against her heart. She had spent so many nights like this, listening, waiting, praying without words. But tonight, there was something new, layered into that familiar fear. Possibility. It was fragile, uncertain, almost frightening in its own way. For years, Sana had learned not to hope too much. Hope, she had discovered, could be as painful as loss when life had a way of taking everything without warning. Yet now, after everything that had happened in the past 2 days, she could not stop her mind from reaching toward it. "What if this changes everything?" she whispered softly, more to herself than to him. Yusuf stirred slightly, his eyes opening just enough to find her in the dim light. "You're awake," he murmured. Sana smiled gently. "So are you." He studied her face for a moment, his weak but perceptive gaze catching something she had not realized she was showing. "Something happened," he said quietly. Sana hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Good?" he asked. She paused again, choosing her words carefully. "I think it could be." Yusuf's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then you should not look so worried." Sana let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "Because good things do not come easily." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "You always say we must fight for them." His words settled into her chest, simple yet powerful. She squeezed his hand gently. "I did say that, didn't I?" "Yes," he replied. "So don't be afraid now." Sana looked at him. Really looked at him, the boy who had endured more than any child should, yet still found strength to encourage her. In that moment, something inside her steadied. "I won't," she said softly. But as Yusuf drifted back to sleep, Sana remained awake, her thoughts slowly pulling her backward in time. Back to a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Back to the beginning. She remembered the first day she stepped onto the campus of the University of Lagos. The air had been filled with excitement. Voices of students from different backgrounds, all carrying dreams larger than themselves. She had walked through those gates with a heart full of hope, clutching her admission letter as if it were a key to a new world. And for a while it had been. Sana had excelled quickly. Languages came naturally to her, flowing through her mind, as if they had always belonged there. French lectures that others struggled to follow felt almost effortless. She found herself helping classmates, explaining complex phrases, even correcting subtle errors in pronunciation. Her lecturers noticed. Miss Bello, one of them, had said during a class, "You have a rare gift. Do not waste it." She had smiled, then shy but proud. Back then she believed she never would. But life had other plans. The memory shifted, from bright classrooms to crowded markets, from textbooks to heavy baskets. Her mother's laughter echoing between stalls, her voice strong, her presence steady. She had been the foundation of their small world, holding everything together with quiet resilience. Until the day she collapsed. Sanaya could still see it clearly, the sudden fall, the panic, the rush to the hospital. The sterile smell of the ward, the hurried voices of doctors, the weight of words that came too late. She should have come earlier, as if they had a choice, as if money had not stood like an invisible barrier between life and death. The days that followed, blurred together. Hospital bills borrowed money, desperate attempts to hold on to something that was already slipping away. And then the silence that came after. Final, unforgiving. Sana had not cried at first. There had been too much to do, too many decisions to make. It was only later, alone in the darkness, that the grief had come, quiet, overwhelming, impossible to escape. And with it came responsibility. Yusuf, still young, still dependent, still needing more than she knew how to give. There had been no time to think about dreams, no space to consider what she wanted, only what needed to be done. She had returned to the university, once standing outside the gates watching other students walk in and out. She had held her books tightly, feeling the weight of everything she was about to lose. Then she turned away, and never went back. Instead, she took the first job she could find. Cleaning, washing, carrying, surviving. At first she told herself it was temporary. Just until things improved, just until she could save enough to return. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. And slowly, quietly, that dream began to fade. Not because she forgot it, but because she learned how to live without it. Yet even then, she had not completely let go. At night, when Yusuf slept and the world grew quiet, she would take out her old books. The pages were worn, some marked with water stains, others with notes scribbled in the margins. She would read by the dim light of a small lamp, translating passages, practicing phrases, keeping something alive that no one else could see. It was her secret, her escape, her reminder that she was more than the life she had been forced into. And now, that hidden part of her had been seen, recognized, pulled into the light. Sana leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for a moment. Everything she had endured, every silent night, every moment of quiet persistence, it had not been wasted. It had led her here. But that did not mean the path ahead would be easy. If anything, it would be harder. Because now she would be tested, not in silence but in the open, not in the safety of invisibility but under the weight of expectation. And not everyone would want her to succeed. She thought of Ifeoma Okafor, of the way her eyes had hardened, of the subtle warning in her voice. This was not just about proving herself anymore. It was about surviving in a space where power was guarded fiercely, where change was resisted, and where someone like her, someone who did not belong, would be watched closely. Sana opened her eyes again, her gaze drifting to Yusuf. "For you," she whispered, but also for herself, because for the first time in years she had been given something she thought she had lost forever, a chance, and this time, no matter how difficult it became, she would not let it slip away. Ket Thuk Fan 9 Tiep Tuk Yu Kau Viet Ju 1002 1200 to Theo Kwai Jin Fan 10 Morning came with a thin veil of Harmattan haze softening the skyline of Lagos into pale gold and gray. For Sana Bello, the light felt different on her skin, as though the city itself were asking her to choose who she would be today. She stood for a moment at the doorway of her small room, watching the street come alive. Vendors setting up stalls, children in uniforms hurrying past the distant call of buses already filled to the brim. This had always been her world. It still was, but now something within her refused to remain the same. She turned back to Yusuf Bello, who sat propped against the wall, trying to hide the strain in his breathing. "I will go early today," she said gently. "There is more work." Yusuf studied her with quiet seriousness. "You look different," he said. Sana paused. "Different how?" "Like you are going somewhere," he replied, searching for the right words. "Not just going to work." A faint smile touched her lips. "Maybe I am." He nodded slowly, as if that answer made sense to him. "Then don't come back the same," he said. The words stayed with her as she stepped outside. On the journey to Adebayo Global Holdings, the city pressed close, noisy, unfiltered, alive. Sana moved through it with a calm she did not entirely feel, her thoughts shifting between the past she carried and the future she was stepping into. By the time the glass building rose before her, tall and distant like a promise she was not sure she deserved, her heartbeat had steadied into something quiet and determined. Inside, the air was cooler, sharper. Conversations paused as she passed, not dramatically, but enough to remind her that she was no longer unseen. She felt it in the way people looked, in the way silence followed her footsteps, in the careful distance others kept, as though they were waiting to see if she would rise or fall. At the executive floor, a message awaited her. "Report to conference room B, 9:30 a.m. No name signed it, but she knew. She arrived early. The room was smaller than the main conference hall, but no less formal. A large screen stood at the front, and a long table stretched through the center, already set with documents and devices. The atmosphere felt prepared, deliberate. This was not routine. This was examination. Sana took a seat at the far end, her hands resting lightly on the table, her eyes moving quietly over the materials. She did not touch anything yet. She only observed, allowing herself to understand the space before stepping into it. The door opened at exactly 9:30. Tunde Adebayo entered, followed closely by Ifeoma Okafor and two senior executives Sana had only seen from a distance. Their presence filled the room without effort. Tunde did not sit immediately. His gaze moved to Sana, measuring steady. "You are early," he said. "Yes, sir." "Good." He took his seat and the others followed. Ifeoma remained standing for a moment, her eyes flicking briefly toward Sana before she settled into her chair. "This will be your first formal evaluation." Tunde said, his tone direct. "Not as a cleaner, as part of this company." The distinction settled heavily in the room. Sana nodded. "I understand, sir." Tunde gestured toward the documents. "You will review these and prepare a summary. Not a translation, an analysis." Sana's eyes moved to the papers. Charts, reports, projections, complex, layered, requiring not just language but understanding. "You will identify risks, opportunities, and recommendations," he continued. "You have 1 hour, no further explanation, no guidance." The message was clear. This was where she would prove whether she belonged. "Begin," Tunde said. Sanaya reached for the first document. Her fingers were steady, though her mind sharpened instantly, shifting into a focus she had not felt in years. The pages were dense with information, financial structures, regional expansion strategies, legal frameworks. It was not enough to understand the words. She had to see the meaning beneath them. Minutes passed in silence. The executives watched, though discreetly. Ifeoma's gaze lingered longer than the others, searching for hesitation, for uncertainty, for any sign that Sana might falter under pressure. But Sana did not rush. She read carefully, her eyes moving line by line, her mind organizing information, connecting patterns. Every now and then, she made a small note on a sheet of paper. Beside her, her handwriting precise, controlled. Halfway through, Tunde leaned back slightly, observing her with quiet interest. There was no panic in her expression, no attempt to impress, only concentration. That, more than anything, caught his attention. After 40 minutes, Sana set the last document down. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she reviewed her notes once more, ensuring clarity before lifting her head. "I am ready, sir," she said. Tunde nodded. "Proceed." Sana stood. Her heart beat once strong, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "The proposal presents a structured expansion into 3 regional markets," she began. "However, the financial projections rely heavily on optimistic timelines that do not fully account for regulatory delays." One of the senior executives shifted slightly. Sana continued, her confidence growing with each sentence. "The primary risk lies in overestimating short-term returns. If implementation is delayed, the cost structure becomes unstable." She moved to the next point. "However, the opportunity is significant. With proper staging, the company can establish early presence in emerging markets, securing long-term advantage." She paused briefly, then added, "This requires a revised approach." Tunde's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disapproval, but in focus. "What approach?" he asked. Sana met his gaze. "A phased entry," she said. "Prioritizing regulatory alignment before capital deployment. This reduces immediate risk while maintaining strategic positioning." Silence followed, not empty, but attentive. She continued, outlining adjustments, each point clear, grounded, practical. There was no unnecessary language, no attempt to sound impressive, only understanding, translated into action. When she finished, she lowered her hands. "That is my assessment." The room remained quiet for a moment. Then one of the executives spoke. "Your analysis is accurate." Another nodded. "Very precise." Ifeoma said nothing, but her expression had changed. Not disbelief, not denial, something sharper, because this was no longer a question of whether Sana was capable. That had already been answered. This was something else, something deeper. Tunde remained still for a moment, longer before speaking. "You see the risks clearly," he said. "But what about leadership?" Sana hesitated slightly. "Sir, if you were responsible for this decision," he continued, "would you proceed?" The question was direct, unavoidable. Sana considered it carefully. Then she answered. "Yes," she said. A pause, but differently. Tunde's gaze held hers. "Explain." And in that moment, the evaluation shifted again. From analysis to judgment. Sanaya did not answer immediately. The question Tunde had placed before her was not one that could be approached with speed. It was not about knowledge alone, nor about the careful balance of words she had mastered over the years. This was something else, something that required judgment, responsibility, and the quiet courage to stand by what she believed, even when the room itself felt heavier than her voice. She drew a slow breath, allowing her thoughts to settle, organizing them not out of fear but out of clarity. "Yes, sir," she repeated softly. "I would proceed, but differently." The room remained still, the attention fixed on her, not out of curiosity now, but expectation. Sanaya lifted her head slightly, meeting Tunde's gaze without challenge yet without retreat. "I would begin with smaller commitments," she said, her tone calm but deliberate. "Not because the opportunity is weak, but because trust has not yet been fully established." One of the senior executives leaned forward, his fingers interlocked. "And you believe trust is the primary issue?" Sanaa nodded. "Yes, sir. The financial risks are visible. They can be calculated, adjusted, managed. But trust." She paused briefly, choosing her words carefully. "Trust determines whether those adjustments will be honored." Her statement lingered in the air. Across the table, Tunde did not interrupt. His eyes remained steady, watching, not just what she said, but how she said it. Sana continued her confidence, growing not from arrogance, but from the quiet certainty of understanding.
If we move too quickly, she explained, we may secure a contract, but we risk weakening the foundation of the partnership. And when pressure comes, and it always comes, it is the foundation that determines whether the structure holds. The Kenyan consultant, who had remained silent until now, gave a slight nod. And your solution? Sana shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself before answering. A staged approach, she said. Initial collaboration on smaller, low-risk projects. Shared oversight. Transparent reporting from both sides. This creates accountability before expansion. She paused, then added, it also allows both parties to learn how the other operates in practice, not just on paper. There was a subtle shift in the room, not dramatic, but real, because what she was describing was not theoretical. It was practical, rooted in an understanding of how people, not just systems, behaved. Tunde leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unreadable. And if the partners refuse, he asked. Sana did not hesitate this time. Then we wait, she said. A faint murmur moved through the executives. Wait, in a market driven by speed and competition. But Sana did not retreat. Rushing into a fragile agreement will cost more in the long term than waiting for a stable one, she explained. Opportunity is important, but sustainability is what protects it. The room fell quiet again. Not because they disagreed, but because the simplicity of her reasoning made it difficult to challenge. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tunde asked another question, his tone sharper this time. And you are confident in this position? Sana met his gaze fully. Yes, sir. There was no hesitation. No uncertainty, just quiet conviction, and that more than anything she had said held the room, because confidence without arrogance was rare, and it could not be faked. Tunde studied her for a long moment, then nodded once slowly. Sit. Sana obeyed, lowering herself back into her chair. The evaluation was not over, but something had shifted. The questions that followed were no longer designed to test whether she understood. They were designed to explore how far that understanding extended. For the next 30 minutes, the discussion deepened. The executives presented variations of the proposal, alternative scenarios, unexpected challenges, hypothetical risks. Each one was crafted to push her thinking further, to find the limits of her reasoning. Sana listened carefully to each, never rushing her responses, never speaking simply to fill silence. When she answered, it was with clarity. Her thoughts structured, her words measured. At times, she acknowledged uncertainty. I would need more data to confirm that, sir. At other times, she challenged assumptions. That approach may solve the immediate issue, but it could create a long-term imbalance. And occasionally, she remained silent for a few seconds before speaking, allowing her answer to form completely, rather than forcing it. The room began to adjust to her rhythm. They stopped expecting quick replies. They started listening for depth. Even Ifeoma, who had entered the room, prepared to dismantle her, found fewer opportunities to interrupt. Each time she attempted to question Sana's conclusions, the response that followed was not defensive, but precise, grounded in reasoning that was difficult to dismiss, without exposing flaws in the argument itself. Frustration flickered behind her composed expression, because this was not how it was supposed to unfold. This was not a moment she could control, and control for Ifeoma had always been everything. Finally, as the discussion reached its natural conclusion, the room fell into a quiet pause. Tunde placed his hands on the table, his gaze moving briefly across the executives, before returning to Sana. That will be all, he said. The evaluation was complete. Sana exhaled slowly, her body only now beginning to release the tension it had carried throughout the session. She did not allow herself to relax completely, but there was a subtle shift in her posture,
a quiet acknowledgement that she had endured something significant. The executives gathered their documents, their movements more thoughtful than before. Some gave her brief nods as they stood, gestures small but meaningful. Recognition, not given lightly. Ifeoma remained seated for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. When she finally stood, her expression had returned to its usual composure. But beneath it, something had changed. Not defeat, not acceptance, something quieter, more dangerous. She turned without a word and walked out of the room. Tunde remained seated. He watched Sana for a moment longer, as if considering something not yet spoken. "You handled yourself well," he said finally. "Thank you, sir." There was a pause. Then he added, "This is only the beginning." Sana nodded. "I understand," and she did. Because what she had gained was not security, it was opportunity, and opportunity came with its own risks. As she left the room, stepping once again into the hallway, the world outside felt both familiar and entirely new. The same walls, the same people, the same quiet tension in the air. But now she carried something different within her. Not just hope, not just fear, but a growing awareness of her own place in a space that had once rejected her. And somewhere beneath the surface of it all, forces were beginning to move. Because success does not go unnoticed, and neither does change. By midday, the evaluation had already begun to ripple through Adebayo Global Holdings like a quiet storm. No official announcement had been made, yet conversations traveled swiftly between offices, whispered in corners, exchanged in quick glances and lowered voices. It was no longer just about curiosity. It was about adjustment people, recalibrating their understanding of someone they had long ignored. Sana Bello felt it in every step she took. When she passed the administrative desks, conversations softened. When she entered the break area, eyes followed her, not openly hostile, not openly friendly, but watchful. She did not rush through these moments, nor did she linger. She simply moved with the same calm composure she had carried into the evaluation room, as though the attention did not belong to her. Inside, however, her thoughts were far from still. She replayed the questions from the session, the tone of Tunde's voice, the reactions of the executives. She measured her own responses, not with doubt, but with a quiet discipline she had developed over years of self-study. There were places she could have spoken more clearly, points she might refine, ideas she wanted to revisit. This, she realized, was different from survival. Survival required endurance. This required growth. The distinction settled deeply within her. As she reached a quiet corner near the large windows overlooking the city, she allowed herself a brief pause. The skyline stretched wide before her, buildings rising in uneven lines, each one carrying its own story of ambition and struggle. Somewhere within that vastness, she now had a place, uncertain, fragile, but real. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're adjusting quickly." Sana turned. Tunde Adebayo stood a few steps away, his presence as controlled as ever. He had a way of appearing without announcement, his movements quiet despite the weight of authority he carried. "Yes, sir," Sana replied. He stepped closer, stopping beside her as he looked out over the city. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You analyze the proposal well," he said finally. "Better than some people who have been in this company for years." Sana lowered her gaze slightly. "I am still learning, sir." Tunde nodded. "Good. That means you understand the difference between ability and mastery." She absorbed the words without responding immediately. "Today is not over," he continued. "There is a call this afternoon. International partners, real-time negotiation." Sana's attention sharpened instantly. "Yes, sir. You will join," he said. "Not as an observer." A brief pause. "You will participate." The weight of the statement settled over her. "I understand." Tunde turned his head slightly, studying her expression. No hesitation, he asked. Sana considered the question carefully. There is hesitation, she admitted, but I will not let it stop me. A faint shift passed through his expression. Not quite approval, but something close. That is the correct answer, he said. Before she could respond, he added, Be prepared. Then he walked away, leaving her alone again with the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Elsewhere in a smaller office down the corridor, Ifeoma Okafor sat behind her desk, her posture perfectly composed, her fingers resting lightly against the surface as she reviewed a set of documents. To anyone passing by, she appeared calm, focused, entirely in control. But beneath that stillness, her thoughts moved sharply. The morning had not gone as she intended. She had expected hesitation, uncertainty, at least a single mistake large enough to exploit. Instead, Sana had remained steady, precise, composed in a way that disrupted the balance Ifeoma had carefully built over years. This was no longer a situation that could be handled with simple dismissal. It required strategy. She reached for her phone again, dialing a number she knew would not appear suspicious. Yes, she said once the line connected. I need you to confirm something for me. She listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. The documents for this afternoon's call, have they been finalized? Another pause. I see. Her eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice remained smooth. Make sure the updated version is sent to the correct channels, she said. No errors. She ended the call slowly, placing the phone back on the desk. Then for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, controlled smile. If Sana wanted to rise, she would have to prove herself under pressure. And pressure, Ifeoma knew, revealed everything. By late afternoon, the conference room had been prepared once again, though the atmosphere this time was markedly different. There were no spectators, no unnecessary staff, lingering near the doors. Only those directly involved in the negotiation were present. The air felt sharper, focused, professional. Sana entered quietly, taking her place beside the table. She had reviewed as much as she could in the limited time available, studying the key points, anticipating possible challenges. But she also understood that preparation could only take her so far. What mattered now was presence. Tunde sat at the head of the table, his attention fixed on the screen as the call connected. One by one, the faces of international partners appeared, representatives from different regions, each carrying their own expectations, their own concerns. The conversation began. Formally, introductions exchanged, pleasantries observed. Then quickly, it shifted. The discussion moved into negotiation. Numbers, timelines, conditions. The pace was faster than before, the tone more direct. There was less patience, less room for uncertainty. This was no longer a test designed for evaluation. This was real. Sana listened carefully, her focus narrowing as the conversation layered over itself. Different accents, overlapping voices, subtle shifts in tone that signaled agreement or resistance. At first, she remained silent, observing, understanding the flow. Then a moment came. A point of confusion. Two partners, speaking at once, their meanings crossing, their intentions misaligned. The room tensed slightly. Tunde glanced toward Sana. A single look. Enough. Sana leaned forward slightly. Allow me, she said, her voice calm but clear. The room adjusted. She listened again, separating the threads of conversation, identifying the core issue beneath the noise. Then she spoke, not just translating, clarifying. There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the timeline for regulatory approval, she explained. What is being proposed is not immediate implementation, but a staged process. Her words cut through the confusion, aligning the discussion once more. The partners paused, then nodded. The conversation resumed, smoother now, more precise. Sana continued to follow closely, stepping in only when necessary, her contributions measured, purposeful. Each time she spoke, It was with clarity that guided the discussion forward rather than interrupting it. Tunde watched her quietly, not intervening, not correcting, only observing. Because now the question was no longer whether she could perform under controlled conditions. It was whether she could hold her ground in reality. And as the minutes passed, the answer became clear. She could. The call concluded with agreement on revised terms. The tension that had once threatened the deal replaced by cautious alignment. As the screen went dark, the room remained still for a moment. Then one of the senior executives exhaled quietly. That could have gone very differently. Tunde did not respond immediately. His gaze remained on Sana, because he knew exactly how differently it could have gone, and how narrowly they had avoided it. Sana leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands resting calmly, though her pulse still carried the energy of the moment. She had done it again. Not perfectly, not without effort, but effectively. And that was enough. Across the room, unseen by most Ifeoma's expression, hardened just slightly. Because the pattern was becoming undeniable. This was no longer a question of potential, it was proof, and proof changed everything. By the time the call ended, the late afternoon light had begun to soften, stretching long shadows across the polished floors of Adebayo Global Holdings. The city beyond the glass walls glowed faintly under the fading sun. But inside the building, something far more significant had shifted. Something quiet but irreversible. Sana Abello remained seated for a moment after the others began to gather their documents. Her breathing had steadied, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in her chest. It had not been a test. Not really. It had been something far more real, far more demanding, and she had stood her ground. Across the table, Tunde Adebayo rose slowly, his expression composed as always, though his thoughts moved beneath the surface with unusual intensity. He had seen enough to recognize patterns, to identify talent, to measure risk. And what he had seen in Sana was no longer a question. It was a fact. "Stay," he said simply. The others paused briefly, then continued out of the room without comment. Doors closed softly behind them, leaving only Sana and Tunde in the quiet space. Sanaya stood slowly, unsure of what would follow. Yes, Sir Tunde did not speak immediately. Instead, he walked to the far side of the room, his gaze resting on the city below as though he were considering something larger than the moment itself. "You changed the direction of that call," he said finally. Sana hesitated. "I only clarified what was being discussed, sir." "No," Tunde replied, turning slightly. "You did more than that. You prevented a breakdown." The words settled heavily in the room. Sana lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Recognition still felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, as though it belonged to someone else. Tunde studied her for a moment longer, then gestured toward the chair. "Sit." She obeyed, though the tension in her posture remained. There was a pause. Then Tunde spoke again, his tone measured, deliberate. "I want to understand something," he said. "Not your skills. I have seen those." Sana listened carefully. "I want to understand how someone like you ends up here." He continued, his gaze steady. "Cleaning floors, being ignored, while carrying this." He did not need to explain what he meant. Sana knew. For a moment she said nothing. Because the answer was not simple. It was not a single event. It was a series of moments, choices, losses, each one shaping the path that had led her here. "My mother died," she said quietly. Tunde did not interrupt. She was everything, Sana continued. "She worked in the market. She took care of us. She made sure I could go to school." Her voice remained steady, but there was a depth beneath it, something carried over years of quiet endurance. "When she became sick, we did not have enough money," she said. "We waited. We tried to find help. By the time we reached the hospital," she paused briefly. "It was too late." The room felt heavier. Not with pity, but with truth. "I had to choose," Sana went on. "Stay in school, or take care of my brother. And you chose him, Tunda said. Yes, sir. There was no hesitation in her answer. No regret. Only certainty. Tunda nodded slowly. And the languages, he asked. You continued learning. Sana allowed a faint, almost distant smile to touch her lips. At night, she said, when everything was quiet. He raised an eyebrow slightly. You taught yourself, yes, sir. Another pause, this time longer, because what she was describing was not just discipline, it was resilience, the kind that could not be trained, only lived. Later that evening, as the office began to empty, Tunda made a decision, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with the same careful consideration he applied to every major move within his company. Come with me, he said. Sana looked up, surprised. Sir, now, he added, already moving toward the door. She hesitated only briefly before following. The drive through Lagos was quieter than she expected. Tunde did not speak, and Sana did not ask questions. The city moved around them, crowded streets, flashing lights, the constant motion of people and vehicles. But inside the car there was a stillness that felt intentional. They left the main roads behind, turning into narrower streets, then into an area where the buildings grew smaller, less polished, familiar. Sana's breath caught slightly. Sir, she began, but Tunde did not respond. Not yet. The car slowed, then stopped. Sana looked out the window, and her heart tightened, because she recognized the place, her street, her home. Tunde stepped out of the car first. Sana followed, confusion and unease rising within her. Why are we here? She asked quietly. Tunde looked around, taking in the environment, the worn structures, the uneven ground, the quiet signs of struggle that were easy to overlook from a distance. I wanted to see, he said. See what the truth, he replied. Sana did not answer, because the truth was all around them. Inside the small room, Yusuf Bello looked up in surprise as they entered. Zana, he called weakly. She moved to his side immediately. I'm here. His eyes shifted to Tunde, uncertain. Who is that? Sana hesitated. This is my employer, she said. Tunde stepped forward slightly, his gaze softening just enough to acknowledge the boy without overwhelming him. Hello, Yusuf, he said. Yusuf nodded slowly, his curiosity evident despite his condition. Sana adjusted the thin blanket around him, her movements gentle, practiced. Tunde watched, not as a distant observer, but as someone seeing something he had never truly considered before. This was her world, not the polished floors, not the glass offices. This, the quiet struggle, the responsibility, the reason behind everything she had done. Does he receive treatment? Tunde asked. Sana shook her head slightly. Not consistently. Why, she hesitated, then answered simply. Because we cannot afford it. The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. Their weight spoke for itself. Tunde remained silent for a moment, absorbing what he had seen, what he had heard. Then he nodded once, a decision forming, not spoken, but certain. As they left, the night had deepened, the city lights flickering in the distance. Sana walked beside him, her thoughts unsettled. You did not have to come, she said quietly. Yes, Tunde replied. I did. She looked at him, searching for understanding. Why, he paused briefly, before answering. Because I needed to know what I almost ignored. The words stayed with her, because they carried more than acknowledgement. They carried responsibility. Behind them, in the shadows of the street, unseen and unnoticed, someone watched. A figure standing just far enough to remain hidden. Observing, waiting, because not all interest was harmless, and not all attention came with good intentions. As the car drove away, the path ahead for Sana began to take shape, not just within the company, but beyond it. Because now the truth of her life had been seen, and once truth is revealed, it cannot be undone. The next morning, Lagos woke under a sky washed clean by the night's breeze. the air carrying a fragile sense of clarity. Inside Adebayo Global Holdings, however, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Word had spread quietly, carefully but unmistakably, that something significant was about to happen. At exactly 9 o'clock, a company-wide message appeared in every employee's inbox. All senior and junior staff are to assemble in the main conference hall at 10 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. No explanation, no details, just instruction. And in a place where authority moved with precision, that was enough to command attention. By the time the clock approached 10, the large conference hall was filled. Executives in tailored suits stood beside junior staff in simpler attire, the usual invisible boundaries between them softened by shared curiosity. Conversations rose and fell in uncertain tones, each person attempting to guess the reason behind the sudden gathering. At the far side of the room, Sana Bello stood quietly near the wall. She had received the message like everyone else, but something in her chest told her this was not just another meeting. Her eyes moved slowly across the room faces. She recognized others she did not, all drawn together by something unseen. She felt the weight of their presence, the anticipation that hung in the air like a question waiting to be answered. Nearby, Zainab Musa leaned closer. "Do you know what this is about?" she whispered. Sana shook her head. No. But even as she said it, she felt a quiet certainty rising within her. This had something to do with her. At the front of the hall, a door opened. Silence spread quickly, conversations fading as Tunde Adebayo stepped onto the stage. His presence alone was enough to command attention. But today, there was something different in his expression. Something more deliberate, more resolved. Behind him, a few members of senior management took their places, including Ifeoma Okafor, whose posture remained composed, though her gaze flickered briefly toward Sana before settling forward again. Tunde waited until the room was completely still. Then he spoke. This company was built on one principle. He said, his voice steady, carrying easily across the hall. Value, a pause, recognizing it, investing in it, and ensuring it is not wasted. The words were a familiar part of the company's identity. But today they felt heavier, more personal. Tunde's gaze moved across the crowd. Yesterday I was reminded of something important, he continued. That value does not always appear where we expect it. A ripple moved through the audience. Some glanced at one another. Others remained still, listening more closely. I made a mistake, Tunde said. The statement landed with quiet force. Because men like him did not speak those words lightly. I underestimated someone in this company, he continued. Not because of lack of ability, but because I chose not to see it. Silence deepened. Across the room, Sana felt her breath catch. She did not move. She did not look away. She simply stood, her heart beating steadily as the moment unfolded. Tunde turned slightly, his gaze finding her. Sana Bello, he said. Every head in the room turned. Sana felt the weight of their attention heavier than anything she had experienced before. For a moment, instinct urged her to step back, to disappear, to return to the safety of invisibility. But she did not move. Come forward, Tunde said. Her legs felt unsteady as she stepped away from the wall, moving slowly through the crowd. The space parted for her, people shifting aside, their eyes following her every step. Each movement felt amplified, every breath louder, but she kept walking until she reached the front, until she stood beside him. This is Sana Bello Tunde, said his voice calm but clear. For 2 years she has worked in this building as part of the cleaning staff. A murmur moved through the room. Some nodded, recognizing her. Others looked surprised. And in those 2 years, he continued, her abilities went unnoticed. The words hung in the air, not as an accusation, but as truth. Yesterday, Tunde said she demonstrated a level of skill that not only exceeded expectations, but directly impacted a critical international negotiation. The murmurs grew louder now, though still controlled, because what he was saying was undeniable. Tunda turned slightly toward Sana. "I made her a promise," he said. Her chest tightened. "And I intend to keep it." The room fell silent again, because now something was about to change. Sana Bello Tunde said, his tone firm, effective, immediately. "You are no longer part of the cleaning staff." A pause. "You are appointed as a junior consultant in international communications and strategy." The words echoed through the hall. Clear, final, unavoidable. For a moment, no one reacted, as if the reality of what had just been said needed time to settle. Then a shift, small at first, then growing, whispers, glances, recognition. Because this was not just a promotion, it was a disruption, a breaking of something long, assumed to be fixed. Sana stood still, her mind struggling to fully absorb what she had just heard. The room blurred slightly around her, the faces, the lights, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. She had imagined change, hoped for it. But not like this. Not in front of everyone, not with such finality. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. Her voice did not carry far, but it did not need to, because the moment spoke for itself. Tunde nodded once, then turned back to the room. "This is not charity," he said. "This is recognition." His gaze sharpened slightly. "And it will not be the last." The message was clear, to everyone. Value would be seen, wherever it existed. From the side of the stage, Ifeoma Okafor watched her expression, carefully controlled. She did not react, she did not speak, but behind her calm exterior, something had shifted. Not defeat, not yet, but something deeper. Because this was no longer a situation she could quietly manage. This was public, irreversible, and that made it dangerous. As the meeting concluded, the crowd began to disperse, conversations rising again. Louder this time, filled with speculation, surprise, and something else, something unfamiliar. Respect for Sana. She stepped down from the stage, slowly, the ground beneath her feet, feeling both solid and unreal at the same time. Zainab rushed toward her, eyes wide with excitement. "You did it," she whispered. Sana shook her head slightly. "I'm still trying to understand it." Zainab smiled. "Then start believing it." Across the room, Tunda watched her for a moment longer before turning away. The decision had been made. The path had been set. But he knew something others did not. This was only the beginning. Because recognition was not the end of the journey. It was the start of something far more difficult. And somewhere within the building, beyond the noise and the movement, forces were already beginning to shift. Because when the order of things changes, not everyone accepts it quietly. In the days that followed the announcement, Adebayo Global Holdings did not return to normal. It could not. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in titles or roles, but in perception. The quiet boundaries that once defined who belonged where had been disturbed, and though no one spoke about it openly, the change lived in every hallway conversation, every measured glance, every pause that lingered just a moment longer than before. For Sana Bello, the change was immediate, visible, and deeply personal. Her first morning as a junior consultant began, not with a cleaning cart, but with a neatly arranged desk on the executive floor. The chair felt unfamiliar beneath her, the surface of the desk too polished, the silence around her too intentional. For a brief moment she stood still, unsure whether to sit or remain standing, as if waiting for someone to correct a mistake that had not been made. But no one did. Instead, Zainab Musa appeared at her side, carrying a small stack of files. "These are for you," she said, her voice warm with a mix of excitement and caution. "Your first assignments." Sana accepted them with both hands, her fingers steady despite the weight she felt. "Thank you," she replied. Zainab hesitated before adding, "Some people are watching closely." Sana gave a small nod. "I know," and she did. From the moment she stepped into that space, she felt it. The quiet scrutiny, the careful observation. Some colleagues offered polite greetings, their smiles measured but genuine. Others remained distant, their expressions unreadable, their silence louder than any words. And then there were those who did not hide their discomfort at all. At the far end of the office, Ifeoma Okafor stood speaking with two senior staff members. Her posture composed her voice, calm. She did not look directly at Sana, but her awareness was unmistakable, like a shadow that did not need to move to be felt. Sana lowered herself into her chair. She did not let her gaze linger. She did not allow herself to respond. Instead, she opened the first file and began to read. Because this was no longer about proving a moment. It was about sustaining it. The work was demanding, not in a way that overwhelmed her, but in a way that required consistency, attention and endurance. Each assignment carried expectations, each task an opportunity not just to succeed, but to confirm that her place there was not accidental. Sana approached it with quiet discipline. She read thoroughly. She asked questions when necessary. She listened more than she spoke. And when she spoke, it was with the same clarity that had first brought her into that room. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm began to form. She attended meetings, contributed, carefully observed how decisions were made, how power moved, how influence was exercised, not just through authority, but through timing, tone, and restraint. She learned, constantly. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way people responded to her began to change. At first, it was small things, a colleague asking for her opinion, an executive acknowledging her input, a conversation that included her rather than passed around her. Then it grew. Respect did not arrive suddenly. It settled gradually, built through consistency, reinforced by performance. Even those who had doubted her found fewer reasons to question her presence, because she did not demand recognition. She earned it. Outside the company, life continued with its own challenges. Each evening, Sana returned home, her role shifting once again from consultant to caretaker. Yusuf Bello's condition required constant attention, his strength fluctuating, his recovery uncertain. But now there was movement where there had once been stillness. Medical consultations, tests, treatment plans, not immediate solutions, but progress, the kind that had once seemed impossible. One evening, as Sana adjusted the small lamp beside Yusuf's bed, he looked at her with quiet curiosity. "You don't look tired anymore," he said. She smiled faintly. "I am still tired, but different," he insisted. Sana paused, considering his words. "Yes," she said softly. "Different." Because the exhaustion she felt now was no longer tied to hopelessness. It was tied to effort, to growth, to something that moved forward. Yusuf nodded, satisfied. "That is good." She sat beside him, her hand resting gently over his. "It is getting better," she added, "for both of us." Back at the company, change continued to unfold. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, Sana presented a revised communication framework for an international partnership. Her voice was steady, her reasoning clear, her recommendations grounded in the patterns she had observed over weeks of careful study. When she finished, the room did not fall silent out of surprise. It responded. Questions followed. Discussions built on her ideas. And when the meeting concluded, one of the senior executives turned to Tunde and said without hesitation, "She was the right choice." Tunde did not reply immediately, but his glance toward Sana carried quiet confirmation. Later that day, as the office began to empty, Tunde called her into his office once again. "You are adapting," he said. "I am trying, sir." He nodded. "That is evident." There was a pause. Then he added, "Your brother, his treatment." Sana met his gaze. "It has started, and the cost." She hesitated briefly. "It is manageable." Tunde studied her for a moment. "Good," he said. He did not ask further questions. He did not offer unnecessary words. But the acknowledgement was there, clear, intentional. As Sana stepped out of his office, the evening light stretched across the floor. casting long reflections that blurred the line between where she had been and where she was now. She paused near the window, looking out at the city that had once felt overwhelming, distant, unreachable. Now it felt different, not smaller, not easier, but possible. She thought of the nights she had studied alone, the silence that had once surrounded her, the belief she had held onto, even when there was no evidence to support it. She thought of her mother, of the words she had carried for so long. You don't need permission to be who you are. Sana closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, because now she understood something she had not fully seen before. Her journey had never been about proving others wrong. It had been about refusing to lose herself, and in doing so, she had changed everything. Across the building, unseen by most, Ifeoma Okafor stood alone in her office, her reflection staring back at her from the glass. She had watched the changes, measured them, adjusted where she could. But one truth remained. Sana had not faded. She had grown, and that was something Ifeoma could no longer ignore. The game had changed, and now, so would she. In the quiet of the evening, as the building slowly emptied and the city beyond continued its endless motion, two paths moved forward. One built on resilience, quiet strength, and earned recognition. The other, still waiting, still watching, still deciding its next move. Because success does not end the story. It transforms it.
In life, we often judge too quickly. We look at appearances, positions, and circumstances, and we decide what someone is worth before we ever take the time to truly see them. But the story of Sana Bello reminds us of something deeper, something many of us forget in a world that moves too fast. True value is not always visible. Talent does not always announce itself, and strength often grows in silence. Sana was not given an easy path. She was not lifted by luck or privilege. She endured loss, responsibility, and years of being overlooked. Yet she did not allow those circumstances to define her limits. Instead, she continued to grow, quietly, patiently, preparing for a moment she could not even be sure would come, and when that moment arrived, she was ready. But this story is not just about her success. It is also about change. Because sometimes the greatest transformation does not happen in the person who rises, but in the person who learns to see. Tunde Adebayo built an empire by recognizing value, yet even he had to confront his own blind spots. And in doing so, he did something powerful. He chose to correct himself. That choice matters. Because justice is not only about rewarding the deserving, it is also about acknowledging when we have been wrong. So, what can we learn from this? Look again at the people around you, at the ones who are quiet, at the ones who are overlooked. You may be standing next to someone extraordinary and not even know it. And if you are the one being overlooked, do not stop growing. Do not stop preparing. Because your moment may come when you least expect it. And when it does, it will not ask if you are ready. It will reveal whether you are. If this story touched you, tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from and what part of Sana's journey stayed with you the most? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of the strength we all carry within.